All right, again, welcome everybody. Russ here. Glad to see we've got a quorum of folks. A couple topics on the agenda. Dennis is going to lead one on more discussion about the architecture and EDR. And then I have a short discussion on the outline for the white paper that I sent out to see if I got any feedback. And then at the end, we'll take any other input on any other agenda items, either for next time or discussion on things that you'd like to spend more time focusing on in the future. Okay, so with that, I will turn it over to you, Dennis, if you would like to take the helm.
How does that look?
Oh, it's doing something.
Yeah, I can't hear Dennis very well.
How about now? Did that help at all?
Still a little muffled. Is it muffled for anybody else?
You sound more muffled than he does. Maybe it's you.
Oh, maybe it's me.
Yeah, because he sounds okay, at least as good as you. What do you guys think?
Dennis isn't as loud as he usually is for me, but he's clear enough.
I am using a laptop microphone, unfortunately.
Well, that's better. Maybe it's just my old age.
We all share that, Daryl.
Yeah.
Well, let me explain some context. You see in my background all those boxes. This is me moving my laboratory over the next 2 days, so I'm not using my normal infrastructure.
Oh, got you.
Yeah. And you're talking in a warehouse echo chamber.
That's so true.
It looks like one, yeah.
Hey, folks, I spent the first 10 years of my career playing in a loud rock and roll band. So.
You feel comfortable there, Patrick, right?
Huh?
You felt comfortable there?
Huh?
What instrument, Patrick?
Guitar.
Sounds good.
Nice, dude. I just started learning guitar, acoustic.
Did you? Acoustic guitar?
Yeah, I
Oh,
just started.
nice. Yeah, that's
Yeah. I bought a little travel guitar too. If you're a guitarist, you probably know what those are. A little mini one.
Yeah, the Martin, yeah. Or anyway, I got 26 guitars in that direction, maybe like 6 steps.
Whoa.
Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah, I'm only at about a quarter of that.
I digress, right?
Yeah, I should shut up.
No, that's fine. I love to hear personal stories.
You guys are serious.
This is actually my control room here. Recording studio's about 3 feet through the door there.
Nice.
You have a nice setup.
Where are you? I should come visit.
Marlton, New Jersey.
That's not too far. I'm in Maryland.
Yeah. Hop, skip, and a jump. The only problem when I built my studio here, I didn't really think it through. And my wife feels like she's got to clean the house from top to bottom whenever I invite musicians over. And I'm saying, you're talking to rock and roll musicians. You can't believe some of the things we've seen in our life. You don't got to clean the toilet, baby. Anyway, now I really digress.
Watch out for the cat.
Say hello. Say hello. Girl, she's a studio cat.
I see.
I got 14 cats. She's the only one allowed in the studio.
14 cats.
She doesn't pee on my guitars.
When you buy a guitar and get a cat free, is that what you're doing, Patrick?
Anybody need a cat? I'm really telling.
That's sweet.
Say hello, sweetie. Say hello.
All right. All right, let's get back to Dennis if we could.
Obligatory disclaimer, all this stuff is open, free to use, and we'll try to confine the discussion to those things. The scope of what we decided to move on last time were the 2 open source EDR capabilities at either end of the scale sort of dimension. The Google Rapid Response on one end of the scale and the Komodo Open EDR stuff on the more endpoint oriented end of the scale, one aimed at cloud, and all of the endpoints in the cloud, one aimed at a much more conventional view of what IT assets are, how they get compromised, and what we need to be able to do something about that. So over the last week and a half, I've been digging into Komodo, trying to get at how they represent, what they collect, and what are the opportunities for being able to look at that across other EDR capabilities in whatever way we can. In this track, we're focused on EDR more aggressively with respect to the various use cases EDR is intended to address, not the lowest hanging fruit that's being handled in the other track that can be addressed by things that are more response oriented for known threats, with things that are discoverable by APIs in an operating system. This stuff is very different. So what you see in the left-hand side is the telemetry agent architecture associated with OpenEDR. This is very common in EDR systems, whether it's the early systems, Silicium's ECAT, all the way across the board to current systems. There is in EDR an intense focus on inserting yourselves in a place in the operating system at which you can independently verify whether or not the APIs in the operating system are lying to you. That's the opposite of the assumption of tools like Tanium's original capability or OS Query, where the operating system is assumed to give you useful stuff by calling the operating system APIs. EDR tools do not do that, or should not do that, because, of course, the main objective of the attacker is to obfuscate, is to disable, is to hook the APIs and get the operating system to lie to you in round order. So you see the instrumentation here. It includes DLL injection so that you can get in that late binding pipe to determine for any late binding stuff an awful lot about what's happening without it getting a chance to fool the operating system first. Separately, network drivers. You see also file filters inserting right into the file system. And then, of course, process monitors to be able to understand the relationship between the actual threads in an operating system and the perceived processes that the operating system thinks it's running, and what happens between those, what the translation is. In all of that, you see the core components that are the instrumentation of the EDR system. It's a very broad spectrum of capability, far beyond what typically is reported in posture, audit, and compliance systems. And of course, that has its own set of challenges that come along with it. Within that, I needed to get at the information, was hoping I would find sort of a design document that described the intentional architecture. Instead, what we get is what we typically get in fast-moving open source projects, embedded documentation where the APIs documentation is embedded in the source code. And so this is moving a little slower than I had hoped, primarily because I have to reverse engineer what we're getting in terms of understanding what are the parameters, how they're represented, what are the boundary conditions on what they can do. All of that is taking a bit more time. I've included the links so that you can take a peek at what's involved in there. This is the example in the first one that I dug into, and it's one that describes for OpenEDR how it reports its results, that is whatever it sees goes to the rest of the security ecosystem for visibility, for detection purposes, for further analysis. It comes out of the logging environment. And so the place where you find out what's the vocabulary, what's the representation, what's the semantics of what OpenEDR signals to the rest of the community, you find it right here in the source code that shows you what are the tags that are used and written out to the logs as they're being processed in the environment. And there's some idiosyncrasies that emerge here, which are basically just a validation of the earlier observations we made probably a few months ago, that different EDR tools fragment heavily at the telemetry level, so that it's very, very hard by talking to an EDR agent to get commonality in what the signal is coming back and separately what the commands are going out. And that's because they create their own vocabulary at that very first level of detection at the very first level of connecting the telemetry to what it indicates, and of course, how you represent what you want it to do. The classic example is something like verdict here. Now, while you might have something analogous to verdict in every other EDR tool, it's absolutely guaranteed that verdict as classified in EDR, open EDR in particular, will have very little to do with Carbon Black's renderings about the same artifact in terms of its determination of its either anomalousness or potential maliciousness. There is no common ground in the classification scheme or the basis on which it occurs across EDR tools until you get all the way back to the sort of response side of the fence. You'll also see that when you look at things like the registry and you look at things like the network representation of the log information, that there are arbitrary decisions made about what things are called and at what level of granularity they report. Note that when file information comes out of OpenEDR, it's at the connection level. That is very different than other systems that can do a lot of things at the packet level and below the packet level, where you're dealing like Indace with things like retransmissions, or dealing with things that are inconsistent representations at the MAC level of what's going on in the network, stuff that's used by malware all the time. And so you wind up getting into a situation where even the vocabulary of the telemetry becomes very different. The only place this gets coherent again across EDR tools is when you reach a conclusion about what is it in terms of the particular attack behavior that we think is going on with respect to the attack or the TTP. At that level, we're back on common ground where it's possible to correlate again across the tools, but only when you get up at that attack level. At the telemetry level, things balkanize quickly because of the very wide-ranging set of techniques for determining what's an anomaly, or detecting anomalies, or detecting sort of inconsistencies at the lowest level, which is, of course, the bread and butter of EDR stuff. And of course, there is representation. Again, idiosyncratic. On the right-hand side, you see the representation of things like, in particular here, a file. And right in the middle of it, hashes. The ability to compare hashes across very different systems, of course, is always been a challenge because you don't necessarily have the same hash algorithm, the same entropy associated with the distribution in the hash from the thing that's being hashed into the hash buckets, and all sorts of interesting challenges occur unless you happen to be the one owning all of the hashes across the system. That is, consistency in how the hashes are generated, how they're represented, and therefore being able to use them to say, I've seen that file before in another agent somewhere else and can leverage what I understand about it. That's only true if the hashes have an isomorphism that you can leverage. That's not true across EDR tools. A couple of other things came up, and these are for discussion in this session in particular. The first is a recognition of the number of dependencies associated here. While OpenEDR is an open source system, it has a large set of dependencies on a large number of other open source capabilities. That means when you decide to trust and deploy this thing into an environment, you get the broader problem of needing necessarily to implicitly trust all the other stuff that's sitting here. That will change over time. In any commercial consumption of OpenEDR, there's going to be a requirement for an SBOM on OpenEDR itself. Nobody knows who's going to build that, maybe Komodo Security. But separately, there will be that transient need to get an attestation on all of the dependent parts. That's what you see under libraries used lists sitting there. So chasing down that dependency will be a challenge for anybody that consumes OpenEDR in anything but use the open source in the environment by the agency or entity itself. For anybody that provides products or services to the federal supply chain or any part of the federal supply chain, in particular under the executive order, that's going to mean somebody's got to generate a bunch of stuff that characterizes the development environment, the dependencies, and the curation information for these dependent parts. And it's not clear where that's going to come from yet. There are exemptions for direct consumption of open source, but not when that open source is used as part of a commercial offering or part of a service offering, which is an interesting variation. So there's some unknowns there about the extensibility because of these dependencies on other stuff. Separately, there's some dependencies on some services that Komodo Security provides. You'll see that in that paragraph under installation instructions, where there is a usage of external services like file lookup, which is a course that across all of the users of OpenEDR, what do we know about the reputation of a file kind of capability, and the analysis and verdict capabilities, because those are inherently very idiosyncratic to the company, Komodo Security. So they're despite this being an open source solution, it has leveraging, I won't say dependencies because you could probably substitute other capabilities there, but certainly dependencies on consumption services that aren't, of course, free. And then there's the license you use to deal with this as well. Lastly, in that last paragraph, it should be noted that the results right now for OpenEDR are consumed by log streaming capabilities. FileBeat is one of those. And analytic capabilities, both query and aggregation, and some level of pivot in things like Elasticsearch. So I think that's about where it sits right now. The takeaway from this presentation is that in order to characterize enough of what we need to know about OpenEDR, it is going to be more trolling through the source code to get API definitions to understand exactly how we can interact with the system, and then separately understanding what are the places that present an abstraction that allows us to do that consistently across other open source EDR capabilities like Google Rapid Response. So the first step is characterize those in Komodo. The second step is characterize the ones in GRR. And then in connecting the dots between those, look for the places where there is commonality, which provides the basis of being able to do the same commands or get the same or get comparable results from the two different installations that may coexist in the same environment. I think that's it. So questions or responses to these concerns or insults would be good too. So. Go.
Again, I'd like to know who your artificial intelligence agent is and get a copy of you. I'm looking at the GitHub repository, and something I always look for. Last update was 16 months ago to documentation and to the code 17 months ago. Does that play a factor at all in what we're doing here, investing time in this particular one? On the one,
I guess so.
On the one hand, it does make it stable, I guess, so to speak.
Yeah. So we focused on the open source EDR implementations, which they have an uphill slug in being consumed in environments right now, because of course the dominant ones are commercial offerings. And that includes, of course, FireEye and CrowdStrike and all those other guys. It's also an area that's moving rapidly as things move from EDR to more XDR, whether that's a fusion of XDR, NDR and EDR, or whether it's adding analytics on top. Both marketing interpretations of XDR are very, very active in the industry. However, there is a fairly large user base compared to all other open source EDR tools for this stuff, because Komodo's behind it. They can provide the intelligence feeds, the signatures, the behavioral stuff, so that you get that stuff without having to build that infrastructure in the company. For small and medium-sized companies that don't have the security expertise to do the care and feeding of an EDR tool, much less the interpretation of it, that puts these guys in one of the most plausible. But I'm certainly open to any other open source EDR tools that you think might be in a better position.
Yeah, I'm just trying to highlight that this particular open source instantiation is in mothballs. It's tied to the dock in mothballs. So.
Yeah, I think in terms of open source updates, that's probably true. The roadmap seems to point to a more extensive mapping into the MITRE ATT&CK framework, some central management of all the agents. There are a few things on the roadmap, but it is lightly populated.
Where are you seeing that roadmap, by the way? The only roadmap I see is a text file that says roadmap.
Oh, yeah.
Has the entire content in it.
I ran into that
it al-
also. Let's see if I can.
The other thing that concerns me a little bit going towards the age of the code is that all the code is the initial commit. It isn't just that it hasn't been touched in 16 months or 17 months. It's that it was uploaded 17 months ago and there's been no progress on it since the initial release.
And those
that sounds like a dump to me.
And those 24 dependencies are also 24 months old. Anyway, just raising my, my spidey sense went up. I wouldn't want to invest any time in trying to get this to work. So
yeah. So if you have suggestions,
and no, sir, I don't have an alternative.
Oh no. Okay.
Yeah,
I caught that grenade.
Yeah. Don't define a problem you don't have the solution.
That's too easy. Yeah.
Sorry, guys. Let's see if I can pop up this roadmap thing now. This is called. Okay. Well.
Is this going on to another subject, or are you still? Is this part of the Q&A part, Dennis? Because there's a couple of us have some other questions or comments.
Just want to check if you can see this open
EDR.
Okay.
I'm sorry. More explanation of the question. Got it.
Can anybody see this?
Very, very tiny.
Oh,
very tiny.
Say I can see the existence of it, not necessarily.
Yeah, that's what's on it. I see blue and black.
Is that any better at all? Let's see.
Now the resolution is so small.
Okay. At any rate, take this as just an unreadable artifact. This is the state of the roadmap as of, I guess, the end of 2020. At which point Komodo brought a lot of this stuff internal to push the ball forward. I don't know where it heads past this, but I also don't know an open source EDR alternative that is more current at this point, and I'll see if I can find one. At any rate, we do have a roadmap. We do have a significant number of folks using open EDR that populate its base, but the amount of evolution in more ways to detect anomalies and that sort of thing, that's not the active development path in this stuff. Most of the development that happens behind this or in the consumption of the results and the analytics that go on top of it. So I'll stop the share for now. And there was a question coming up that was beyond sort of responses to the status update.
Vasilios, let you go first since you're later in the day.
Questions. So it's very interesting because, you know, what we try to solve is multidimensional, but basically it's a representation problem. And I understand that we have to understand the capabilities of EDRs and converge those. But, you know, my question is with regard to something simpler, like the representation of digital artifacts. Have we checked, for example, you know, because now you have knowledge and you have seen what is there. So have we checked how much of this can actually be represented using stick cyber observables?
Not a lot. Stix is made for indicator sharing between agencies, whether it was in the IODEF or the taxi or even Cybox and Mike, the underpinnings of Stix itself. It was never designed for complete capture of EDR telemetry or the analytic basis for EDR tools. It's really what it says in the name, indicator exchange. And that's the limit of what Stix is capable of doing. To the extent that you do that, then what you have to do is deal with the vocabulary post-detection, not telemetry, and probably with fairly generic mitigations and remediations, which is the level that MITRE ATT&CK lives at, a normalization, but it's also the level that Cybox and Mike and all the other threat indicator, threat response vocabularies live at. Those are not the vocabularies that exist at the agent or even at the mid-tier collectors of EDR tools when you have coordinated management of EDR instrumentation. So the impedance mismatch we're hitting is one that is the difference between threat hunting and the difference between known threat detection and response. Those are two different ends of a continuum, and they are inherently going to be tough to reconcile, except at that place where the MITRE attack matrix lives, as an example, or the place where you have a systems indication of what a mitigation or remediation might be. Those two vocabularies are common. They're common across the ecosystem. They're common across the EDR tools, but they are not the vocabulary that exists at the communication to the agent instrumentation at the EDR level. So the ability to talk to a bunch of EDR agents using sticks normalization will have exactly the same kind of discontinuities you see between the implementation and stick shifter for things like carbon black versus FireEye. They're very, very different. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense. So this is not a path that we want to follow, right?
Well, what we want to know is what are we leaving behind if we normalize at those two gross levels, those two levels where we know there's a good community sort of attachment because we have a normalized vocabulary there, but there isn't a good coverage of the instrumentation to the telemetry at the endpoint level. And so what we need to know is what are we orphaning? What parts of the EDR functionality that's required to solve the problem are we not going to be able to cover with something that leverages those convenient normalizations, if that makes sense?
Yep.
And that's all we're trying to document so that we know what we're doing as opposed to grabbing the low-hanging fruit but not knowing what we're walking away from. So we do have another track that is focused on doing what we can do in the near term based on its expediency, not being slowed down by asking the question, what about the rest of things like threat hunting? Where threat hunting is not an elastic search for an IOC, where it's beyond that. It's emergent anomalous behavior and trying to decide, is it a threat or not?
So Dennis, were you on a call on Monday afternoon when I popped up the graphic on the use case in Ontology form?
I was indeed.
Okay. Yeah, so so the stuff that you showed on, I can't remember which slide it was on, and I apologize, I was popping in and out. I kept getting phone calls during your presentation. Where you got down to the data level, we definitely want to have all of that represented. The data that you would find in those messages that would go back and forth between your endpoint software and stuff. Not necessarily the formats, but what actually those data elements are. We definitely want to capture those at the instance level, and then once we've got that done in the in an ontological presentation, and then map it back to all the different ways that it's actually concretized, if you will, in the different message formats between different systems. Does that make sense? So
it does make
at least
sense.
not all of them, but some representatives, so you can see how it's different between them. But semantically, it's the same once you look at it from an ontological perspective.
That makes complete sense. I don't think there's a process. I don't see emerging from what I'm looking at now. I don't see the emergence of a normalization at that level that makes this simple to do. and I mean that it's that low-level balkanization that's causing this problem. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know how I don't know what it becomes simple to do other than to provide the roadmap so that others can actually be mapping themselves individually to the common perspective.
Yeah,
so,
I think that's absolutely right. It's not actionable unless we can do that. That is, what you get as an indicator, unless you know how it was determined, you don't know what it means. What you know only is that it's got some risk score assigned by a vendor and you're trusting it.
Right. So we'll keep pressing forward, and so all that level of the data. Hopefully, next time we'll meet, we'll have the boxes for people to fill in. This is example data that would be found in a log file that pertains, like you mentioned, the hash file, the hashes of the files. You know, so we'll have the email message, we'll have that malicious software file, which is sitting on the computer, of which that has a hash, and that's what you actually get the observable or the observable or the signature that is observable, that you would be transmitting information back and forth in your different messages. So that's where we want to get there. Hopefully have some time this week and next week to get to that level.
Yeah, because it's going to be reverse engineering their source code in order to get at it, the only documentation, as they indicated in that second slide I showed, it's going to take a while to get completely there. And also, as was observed, that there's not a massive amount of active development on this stuff right now as they move towards, I guess, their XDR implementation, something they also telegraph on the website. This may be in stasis while that occurs. I don't know and can't know, I guess, unless we talk to Komodo Security, the guys who are sponsoring most of the activity here. And maybe that's the next step. Maybe it is to get their intention both on the roadmap and the other stuff. What is the indication of the viability of this code base? But it does say that if there is some awareness of an alternative that is more actively current in pure EDR, that would be interesting. It would also be interesting if there's a more actively evolved or evolving open source alternative in XDR. That would also be interesting. I think the NDR tools are very active. You've got, you know, all of Nessus and a ton of other stuff. Okay, back over to you, Russ, unless there's other questions about the content of track 2 of the EDR extension.
I had one question on track 2 of the EDR extension. You mentioned that there were two pieces. You mentioned the telemetry level, which was hopelessly diverse and independent, and there's really no opportunity there to take any steps toward consistency. But you did mention at the attack level there was. And then, I thought of that and I said, okay, that makes sense, but that's what MITRE ATT&CK is doing. And I would guess you were thinking that they would be able to map to that model. And I thought I heard you say it was in the roadmap. I mean, they never got to it. Is that right?
It's actually a current capability in OpenEDR. They have a mapping to the TTP structure of the MITRE stuff. I haven't found it in the source code yet, but I saw the explicit declaration that they had it. And you'll see it on the Komodo Security site as well. You've got to kind of look at this artifact at OpenEDR from both perspectives, because Komodo Security is using it as a basis of an ecosystem, or is at least one of the parts. So MITRE ATT&CK's there. The roadmap refers to connecting to other malware intelligence sources, I believe, in that first column. I don't know if it was the first or second item in it. So they're looking to expand it, but they're already at MITRE ATT&CK. That's probably true for every viable commercial EDR tool as well, because it's a competitive thing. Everybody has run into this wall of balkanized telemetry in EDR and even NDR to some extent. The answer has been, if I'm going to compare these guys in terms of their forensics, analytics, classification capability, I need some common ground. MITRE ATT&CK is providing that right now, which is why you see these tools being compared using MITRE ATT&CK TTPs as the way to stimulate them and to determine their efficacy in both detection and maybe comprehensiveness in terms of response, because you see that as well. You see recommended mitigations associated with the observed behaviors. That's been missing for a very long time. And now that it's in place, it's becoming a competitive essential characteristic. You can't map into the attack matrix, you get taken far less seriously, because there is no way to then connect the stuff across tools in a broad sense. Does that make sense?
Well, I think so. Although I guess the telling is in the mapping. You said that it exists, but we can't find it.
No, I didn't find it, but there's a lot of source code to go through here.
Okay, so it may be in the because I'm just wondering at that level, if going back to Vasilios's question, and you're talking about TTP structure, that and again sticks again, is that the method they used, or did they try and use in order to bring together and normalize some of this data?
No, Sticks operates at the indicator level and is intended for exchange between groups cooperating. The MITRE TTPs capture the behavioral stuff and can be related to Sticks where an indicator surfaces as a consequence of the TTPs. They are not one-to-one equivalent. That is, they coexist all the time and probably need to for the foreseeable future.
Got you. But if let's take the example you did say, if the behavioral did map to an indicator level, there's some like diagram that shows all how that fits together, or is it just kind of you assembly at your own risk? Bring your
no. In the TTPs, when you look at the attack matrix, there is a place at which indicators are related to this. Yep. How you detect this TTP. But an indicator is nowhere near enough to tell you the rest of a TTP. And the indicator tends to be specific to a particular usage or implementation of a particular set of
no, I get that. But in common scenarios, at least I'm working as a sim kind of guy, the tickling of an indicator, I know there's a lot of a collaboration around it, context around it, but that tickle enables me to drive everything else I need to get to rest.
Yeah, and so at the later stages of an attack, after you've gotten past,
that's right.
This is anomalous, and I don't know if it's malicious.
That's right.
Once you're past that, and the community settles on some leverageable indicators, then you're right. Then you get back into the normal SIM scheme, but there you're no longer an EDR specific turf. We were doing that long before EDR was a twinkle in anybody's eye.
Yeah, but I'm trying to pull EDR into the schema. That I take more of you take like a compounded approach to things, which is great, but I take more of a Lego approach to what piece could I grab onto to take this information. And behavioral is a great example of that. Yeah, we've got new methods of getting security information detected or censored. And that's great, and that's all wonderful. But at the end of the day, it'll be some kind of event, right? Security event, and that maps to more traditional, as you said, traditional stuff we've been using forever. But I can kind of, I'd like to kind of show the way you can take this other new stuff, if you will, or different stuff, and get it to the Lego blocks that we've been using for years. That's what I'm thinking.
So I think you're spot on correct with respect to how do I organize the signal I'm getting back once detection has occurred from EDR systems. But that is a one-way pipe that doesn't say I've got a normalized way to command a herd of different EDR tools. That becomes far less possible. And that's because
although that's we use that in SIM right now. We take a lot of the diversity of the command structures and map it with Sticks to the individual products today. I mean, we can do some of that.
Well, because you've got shared indicators as your common ground, that very synthetic thing that happens after all the EDR stuff happens.
Yeah, right. But I'm just try again building blocking, right? If you have a fundamental Lego, if you will, that'll at least get the EDRs or the things you said you saw on the attack level at the EDR level, that there's ways of getting some consistency, and that's what I was grasping onto.
Yeah, if you were going to treat EDR as a black box, the challenge is you have to put a lot of the forensics collection, the telemetry communication, and the analysis inside that black box. What you can't do is normalize between the agent and the analysis in EDR. That's the place where this all breaks down.
And then that's you thinking compounding again, and me thinking Lego. Yes, I hear what you're saying.
It makes sense, but it tells us also where's the boundary. And so
don't disagree.
So I believe you can do that, and I believe track one is gonna be able to leverage that approach very heavily.
That's partially, partially. Track one is only gotten to the basics of mostly the endpoint stuff. As you said, it was endpoints. It wasn't getting into the NDR, XDR stuff yet, right? Yeah.
It's the implications for things like stick shifter next gen that I think that I'm dabbling in, and there are some hard walls there that push us toward interacting at the boundaries that are sustainable, the places at which we can count on something and know what they mean, as opposed to the ones where they're very idiosyncratic. At any rate, I'll get out of the philosophy domain, and you guys can go on with the rest of the meeting.
Yeah. Hey, Vasilios, you had a comment? Go ahead and say it.
Just to add, I totally understand the obstacles, but this is where the ontology work comes into place, not only OCA, but also the TAC work, right? Because even though that we have a Sticks representation, we extend that. And actually today we had a new extension for the Mighty Attack framework. So it means that we do outside of the sticks field, but we can still interconnect. And also I attended the last IOB Indicators of Behavior meeting, and Johns Hopkins also introduced a behavior object that connects with sticks, but takes the behaviors outside of the indicator object. So it's a top level domain object. Yeah.
Yeah, that's been long needed. That without those particular places of normalization, we would not be able to move things further forward. But sticks needed to get connected, even though it's a one-way semantic mapping, needed to get connected to the TTPs in a very, very explicit way. Excellent news.
All right, and we also need to check also the rest of the efforts, right? Because it came into my mind that OpenC2, command and control, and the endpoint distance profile that we have right now, it can, let's say, deny or block files. But if I remember correctly, the representation of our file is different than the representation of the file as defined by sticks, cyber observable. Yeah, so we need to check all these things and normalize. Over.
If there's an emerging consensus about what the information flow should be between OpenC2 and a forensics and hunting environment, I'd be very interested. But what we've seen so far has been pretty far short of what we would need.
So Patrick, are you rebuilding your lab? I'm getting a lot of noise. Somebody's rebuilding a lab.
That was me. I'm sorry.
Are you building the ontology with physical objects, Forrest?
Yeah, with Tostitos corn chips in a very crunchy bag. I'm trying to double task and make lunch. Sorry.
Gotcha. Well, now that you have the mic, I see you have your hand up. You want to comment as well?
No, that was me failing to put my hand down. Apparently, I thought I did that.
Okay, no problem. All right.
I just wanted you guys to know you woke up my cat. I finally got her calmed down.
I'm sorry, Patrick. Okay, thanks for that discussion. Thanks for that discussion. That was very, very helpful, Dennis. Any other comments before we move to the next topic? Okay, if not, I had sent out sometime, I can't remember when, an outline. You should see it here. Outline of the white paper that we were talking about. And I added some more stuff to it just to give it some, a little bit more content. So I was going to walk through it. And again, I'm looking for some help. And I think, Xavier, you said you may help me, but if you can, that'd be great. So what I've done here is I pulled the objectives of the OCA, I pulled that from our website, right? And we'll embellish that a little bit more. And then our approach for collaboration, I tried to put things that we're doing, right? We're focusing on data interchange. We are leveraging sticks and OpenC2 and whatever else you guys think we need. We are, initiating new projects and working on current ones, which we'll list. And we're discussing emerging topics like, IOB and zero trust that we just mentioned. So, the whole intent of this section is, what is it as the group of OCA body, what are we doing? And we're doing all of these things so people could understand the different venues we have and what they're going against. Then I'm going to have an overview of each of the sticks projects. And I'll need a little help, Forrest, on the ontology one. But, we've got these 4 projects today, and we'll go into a little bit more about what they are, do a higher level than GitHub on each of these things. Because the problem with most of these, unfortunately, is that, we say, here's Stick Shifter, and then we throw you right to a GitHub. And, a customer or somebody that's in the business world don't understand it at that level what the heck these things are. So the idea in the paper is to kind of bridge it between, you know, the low-level GitHub and the code and what it actually does, and the tools and the technology to go with it, to more of the what problems is it solving, what is its value, how does it help you out, that kind of stuff. That's the intention. Then the overview of the work groups. So just like we have an overview of the projects, we do the overview of the work groups. We have this group, the IOB group, the Zero Trust group. Again, you know, it's more of the, you know, what are our objectives, what are we trying to accomplish, that kind of stuff here, and pointing them to the GitHubs for more detail as needed. And then where you can learn more, we have our website, our GitHubs, and our YouTube channel. And then how to get involved, we have our mailing list and Slack channels. So that's the outline. I just wanted to walk you guys through. Does anybody have any comments? Did I miss anything?
Perhaps I lack history, but maybe something that speaks to what makes this effort different from previous efforts to achieve commonality.
Okay,
If we can articulate that.
Any references, David, on those efforts? What are the other different efforts you're thinking of?
I'm speaking off the top of my head. I can't give you specifics. It just feels like the goal of commonality has existed for a long time. I got to believe others have attempted this. What makes this work different from others? And
Although
I'm unfortunately not in a good position to answer that question.
Okay, well, I can answer that in terms of, you know, the commonality has been attacked at the network level, and we've got nice models now. We've been attacked at the system level. No one's done it in security. That's how we have the mess. You could answer it that way. The other thing you could do is show projects like the stick shifter and the other projects. There's projects around the work group, the workbooks, and stuff like that. We could show the related types of open efforts in security and where they fit. I think that would be interesting. We want to do that?
Seems like a worthwhile consideration. Yeah.
Yeah, because what people will ask, we already have X. Why do we need OCA and we got X, whatever X may be? But I can think of that. But on the other side, David, thinking about current efforts that have tried to make security consistent, I can't think of any that have tried and failed. I don't think there's been many. Does anybody know of any? And if there aren't any, it's hard to reference them.
Well, I think there have been a number aimed at different purposes and different usages.
Yes.
You've got all of SCAP aimed around automation of the security baselining and automated checking, a la supporting sort of a compliance perspective almost, but it's all been about security configuration. And then there are probably others with respect to security behavior, all of what's been behind sort of the Verizon Verus stuff, the endpoint stuff that Microsoft did in trying to let the operating system present instrumentation that allows any number of AV vendors to get at stuff. But it's all been at parts of the ecosystem where we were ready at that time for a level of normalization where things were mature enough to normalize, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And so I think there are a series of those where we're now at a time where we have to think across different security portfolios. Part of the reason for that is things like the executive order, right? Over a year ago now, we have a mandate that all critical federal systems have EDR instrumentation on them.
Yes.
That means inherently they're going to be different EDRs, and it's not true that every agency is going to have their own security people looking at the EDR results. So we'll have small collected sets of specialty expertise looking at instrumentation from different sources across the federal ecosystem, which makes now the right time for at least dealing with detection and response normalization, a time that has not existed as a forcing function before this. Now it's required, and it's going to get worse.
Yeah.
So I think there are some forcing functions for why to do some of this now, but it's not the generic unify all of security. It's attack a particular set of problems, in this case, driven by supply chain issues, if that makes sense.
That does make that makes. And I like your thought on forcing functions. Maybe I could put that in the objectives up here or someplace. I think we do need to capture.
Yeah, it's not just opportunity; it's a response to need. Yeah.
Yeah. Why now? Right. Yeah. Exactly. I like the way you laid that out, Dennis. That's cool.
Dennis, my response would be that there's been countless efforts, without going down the rabbit hole, with the discrimination being now that we have emerging things like OpenC2 and Cacao, and so we actually have the constructs out there emerging, not mature yet, but emerging, that would actually allow us to try to put this together. All the other efforts have been one-off, like Varus, OpenIOC, IODEF, even Stick to some extent. But the key thing is the scaffolding, the glue that's becoming available from efforts like OpenC2, which I will cite as I think the best example.
Patrick, I love the way you explain that. That's the Lego head approach. I love it. We've got pieces that we can use now to build bigger pieces.
So we've reached the maturity level. Not, we're on the edge of it, where these things are practical.
It makes it the realm of the possible, Patrick.
Yeah,
right?
in the realm of the possible. Yeah. Absolutely.
I
and
think
hopefully
you're right.
the way we win people over is by reference implementations, working reference implementations at scale. That's why
That is how to move the ball forward.
Hopping in these boats and maybe not rowing as hard as the rest of you folks, but I'm hoping we're approaching that nexus point.
Good points. Good points. I'll try and add those into the pay. I do agree. The forcing function, Dennis, you mentioned in the discussion you had on the, like I call it the Lego block approach that we're talking about here, Patrick, in terms of technology, Cacao, OpenC2, sticks that have evolved and emerged that enable us to start doing some of this. And as you referenced, Dennis, I mean, even like sticks, right? We are pulling some of that stuff together, right? In Kestrel, now we're pulling the threat detection tools together in a certain way, not wholly, but at least in a better way than having 14 different ways of doing it.
Absolutely, and we should push on what things are ready to be pushed on, the places where we have a critical mass of a consumer community. Otherwise, we're doing stuff that won't get used. So that makes complete sense.
Yep. Okay. Yep.
My focus is always going to be on how far can we go as opposed to how far should we go. And so
good. That's good.
I'm the other perspective, I guess.
That's okay. No, we need, it's a collaborative thing. You need that, kind of both viewpoints, I think, in order to be successful.
So Dennis, in your previous answer, you'd mentioned that there was a level of maturity around endpoint telemetry, and I forgot the reference that you mentioned in conjunction with that.
The endpoint telemetry in the EDR space is pretty balkanized, but outside of the EDR space, there has been standardization of what AV tools need to get at stuff. Microsoft standardized, what is it, the AMSI? There's a particular API interface that any antivirus vendor can use to use antivirus signatures of their own to leverage the operating system's ability to tell you what you need to do. So they don't all have to write their own idiosyncratic instrumentation and defend it independently. I think that's what I thought I was referring to, but it is in parts of the security ecosystem, not sweeping across everything. The most demanding, in my view, is EDR because it's the most forensic. The least demanding probably is configuration settings and checklists against those, sort of posture management. And in between that is AV.
Yeah, I was looking for mature examples for posture assessment for PACE.
Oh, got it.
Yep.
Yeah, it's probably things like the SCAP portfolio, the mapping of OVAL into, or XCCDF into OVAL, which gets you device and platform independence to device specific. And then, of course, the vendor standards like Microsoft's AV one. There are others. Maybe I can send you a list once I get more of them in my head.
Okay, excellent. Any other questions or comments? Now we'll move to open discussion. Is there any topics of interest that you want to add to the agenda or other input for the meetings from anyone?
And give us a deadline on the inputs that you want from us, Russell, on the white paper.
Okay. I will do that. And I also put it somewhere so it's common so you can get at it. That'd be nice. It'll be the realm of the
Yep.
I will do that. I'll put it on a Google Drive somewhere that we can share. Okay, very good. Thank you, everybody. And again, Dennis, thanks so much for all the effort you've done to pull this together. I really appreciate your work here. Okay, and with that, I'll end the meeting almost on time. We got like 2 minutes. This is awesome.
Thanks, Russ.
Thank you, everybody.
You'll see you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Bye,
all.
Patrick Skeeton.